To order the Senate Regulated Industries and Utilities Committee. We have only one bill on the agenda today. It's Senate Bill 142, which is Senator Mullis's bill concerning sports betting. It'll be a hearing only today, but I want us to all get educated. I will expect that we'll be taking action on this bill next week. I want to make sure that we understand the parameters and the issues, and if anybody has proposed amendments, you'll have time to get those to me. Senator Miller has already presented me a proposed amendment in a timely manner. Appreciate that, Mr. Pro Tem. We'll take that into account, and you may want to speak to that at some point today if you'd like to. I have had numerous offline conversations with advocates for and against the bill and with the author of the bill to discuss some different angles here, but I want to make sure we understand fully the subject matter. So I will turn the floor over to you, Senator Mullis, if you'd like to present the bill. I understand you have Josh Mackey with you, subject matter expert to help you along.
Thank you. Good way of putting it.
If you would give us the generalities, and we'll let people ask you questions, then we'll turn it over to Mr. Mackey and then others to help explain the bill, and then we'll have other speakers. I have, looks like 6 speakers that have signed up to speak to us today. I'm going to do everything I can to get us out of here by 5 o'clock, maybe a little bit quicker. I know that we're not in session tomorrow and people have traveling ahead of them and we have inclement weather, but don't want to sell you short or cut you off at all, Mr. Chairman. You proceed at your pleasure.
Well, I'm a short and heavy load, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me thank you, for the committee, for being here. And I know this is a large group of leadership of this body, and I'm honored to be in front of you. This is Senate Bill 142. Sports wagering is currently legal in 22 states. Around us, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida is taking it up this year as well. And many people say, well, why should we even consider this? Well, are you aware that the estimate is over 2 million Georgians are doing it now? And you know who is in control of this? The bookies. The people that are controlling the spread and all those aspects of wagering. If you will honor me in supporting this issue, it will be regulated by the Georgia Lottery. It will go to good causes like the Georgia Hope Scholarship. Currently, the Hope Scholarship and the number of students that are taking it, they're in an impact to cross again, and we'll have to do something else that will limit hope for students. Now, I think everybody should be eligible for the lottery. And I certainly hope one day my son will get the lottery. He's on a dean's list right now at Kennesaw, we're still trying to figure out how that happened. But we're awful glad to that. No comments here, Senator Lucas. But the grants that the Georgia Lottery Commission authorizes to manage wagering, thus adding more funds to the Hope Scholarship through this effort, requires right now the bettor to be 21 years old. There's some discussion about right now you can buy a lottery ticket at 18. We may ask this committee to consider that. This allows sports wagering to be placed through mobile sports betting platforms like your phone, a kiosk machine that might be in a airport or maybe in a convenience store or Mr. Chairman, where did you say you saw one?
I have been
I'm not saying
told that they have them at the Beau Rivage Sportsbook in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Okay, but I wasn't talking about anything but sports wagering here. But they could be anywhere, and you can do it on your phone, on your couch.
Thank you.
So those who will be regulating this will be the Georgia Lottery Commission. This currently requires that a $900,000 annual license fee will be expected for those who are managing it on their behalf. The data seems to be the most important thing. Who controls the data? Right now the bookies do. But if you pass this bill, the sports teams will. And that's an important factor. For example, the Atlanta Braves would choose the National Baseball League. The Falcons will choose the National Football League. The Masters will control the golf data, PGA and the golf data to make sure it's all correct instead of falsely presented so that the numbers will be different. So that's the important thing, to make sure it all is ran properly. This requires the lottery to issue a minimum of 16 licenses. Now you say, well, good grief, that could be a lot of licenses. Well, New Jersey is 19 operators. Virginia is 25 operators. Tennessee has 7 operators. Now, how much will this bring in to help the Georgia Hope Scholarship? Well, currently the Tennessee, it should reach about $35 to $50 million. Georgia is nearly double the population. I think it'll be 75 to 100 million. That will go a lot of ways in educating students and giving them opportunities for free education, or after you buy books and student fees, all that, a lot less, let's say, with the applications there. This has the ability to certain types of lottery wages for all sports leagues. Now, we do have a unique cultivating aspect of Georgia sports teams, and I'm talking about the college teams. Our scenario is that the Georgia college teams are not eligible in Georgia to vote for. Our university systems wanted us to not include them and to have a different path. I think that's the way to pass this. Now, you can vote on all sorts of college teams, whether they win or lose. Not different aspects of the wager, but whether they win or lose. Now, professional sports, you can wager how many times they're going to throw the football, kick the football, or scratch their nose in a huddle. You can wager on nearly anything. But just so that the manipulation aspect is not there for the college teams, you can only bet their wager whether they win or lose. This prohibits the categories of individuals from placing sports wagers like athletes, the coaches, the referees, and even any governing body of that sport cannot be a part of the wagering, so that it won't appear or it won't be factual that they're trying to manipulate the playing field, so to speak. In order to give you a better description of this, I'm going to ask my friend Josh Mackey to come up and to give you some more of the details of this bill. It is so easy. I want to ask Josh to come and talk about it.
Thank you. So simple, you want
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Chairman Calcert, for allowing me to talk. My name is Josh Mackey. I represent FanDuel, DraftKings, and BetMGM. I'm actually a recent expert on this. My partner, Cash Trevetti, who most of you know, is currently at the hospital with his wife awaiting the arrival of his second child. So consider me Cash for today. And so on the screen here, we also have Nick Green, if you'll be glad to indulge me. Nick is with the law firm Orrick, also works with the same groups that I do. Nick is a national expert in regards to this and has helped a number of states in enacting their sports betting legislation. So I can give you some highlights. I'm going to turn it over to Nick in just a few minutes and let him talk, and then we can get into some questions you may have. I can go over some of the more common things that people ask about this to preempt some questions. But I think between Nick and I, we can pretty much answer almost anything in regards to the bill. So I think Senator Mullis did a great job just giving an overview of this. Since 2018, we've had 22 states plus, including, and then in addition to that, District of Columbia and Puerto Rico legalized sports betting. Most of that has been through direct law. Only a couple states have done it through constitutional amendments, including Louisiana, Maryland, and South Dakota, which just voted in November. All 3 of those states approved sports betting. The bill you have in front of you is really, does 4 major things. It permits sports betting under the lottery as a lottery game. It establishes a licensing and regulatory process under the lottery for the operators and the usage of data related to sports betting. It establishes parameters of the operators to carry out the sports betting in this state. And then it provides protection and accountability for consumers when they engage in sports betting. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'll go back through maybe some specific parts of the bill, if you're okay with that.
That'd be just fine. Go ahead.
Thanks, Josh, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to appear today. You did note me as a subject matter expert. We'll see about that, but thank you anyways. The goal of the bill here, like 22 other states have found, is really to take an activity that's happening all across Georgia today and all across the country. You just type in Google sports betting and you'll see a dozen websites ready to take your bets right now from Atlanta and everywhere else in the state. Bring that into the sunshine, regulate it, tax it, and protect consumers while we do it. The Georgia bill, with some nuances with respect to the lottery and college betting, does mirror the framework that's been enacted across the country in recent years, including the framework that was enacted in Tennessee, Virginia, Michigan, and elsewhere. And there are obviously some differences to account for Georgia's specific laws and building it into the statutory framework. But I think it does reflect the best practices across the country. And I am happy to talk more specifically on, and I know you may have a number of questions on your mind, happy to take any and all of those.
Great. In addition to that, if you're looking at the bill specifically, there's really 6 parts to it and how it's broken down. Part 1, generally, there's a couple pages before it. On page 9 is the definitions. Part 2 really gets into the powers of the lottery through the regulatory process. Part 3 is really the parameters around the licensing process and the licensees themselves. The next part is really about the parameters of the sports betting process. Part 5 is around taxation, and Part 6 is reporting and penalties and how it's broken down. Some of the more common things that you may have questions about in the bill currently, when you're looking at the tax rate that would be levied on the income of a sports betting operator, it's currently set at 10%. I know there's discussion about it going higher than that. It's defined as a lottery game, and so that's how the Lottery Corporation will be able to regulate it. And thus all proceeds will go to education programs like all other lottery funds. As Senator Mullis mentioned, it includes all professional sports with the exception of horse racing, and it permits bets on college games that do not include a state of Georgia university or team. And one note is that the lottery would issue a minimum of 6 licenses under this unless there are less applicants. So if only 3 to 4 people apply, they could release licenses for the 3 to 4 people that applied as long as they meet the qualifications under the rules and regs. So I think from that standpoint, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys may have. Between Nick and I, like I said, I think we can answer anything, and I'll just say that I think this bill represents, the framework and parameters of the bill, I think represents a general consensus of agreement amongst most everybody in the sporting industry, the betting industry. Obviously there's some details to be worked out and there will be changes, but I think there's a reasonable general consensus among supporters of the bill as to what's before you today.
Okay. Committee members have questions. All right, I'll first recognize the Vice Chairman, Mr. Senator Matt Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if you've got a couple of follow-ups, feel free. You just
Perfect.
told me you've got about 3 listed on your paper, so you don't have to ask my permission just for a short, limited number.
You're a great American, Mr. Chairman. Either sponsor the bill, Mackey, whoever. All right, on the payment from the bettor to the, I think I read in the summary that no credit is allowed, or would you be able to use your debit card, which you can't currently on the lottery unless you do it online, is my understanding, correct?
In the version of the bill before you, you can use a debit card or a credit card.
You can use credit
You can use a credit card in this version of the bill, yes.
Okay. All right, check.
Can you
Okay.
direct us to what line that might
Yeah,
be?
that would be great.
Yeah.
Good question, Mr. Chairman.
Let me pull out my summary, as it is a longer part of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, while he's looking for that, is there another question that we can?
Sure. So, in this, you
It's
could-
on page 30, line 739.
739. Okay. CC. All right, cool. Next question. So, you said horse racing is not allowed?
Yeah, under the Constitution, it's not allowed, so horse racing will not be, like, you can bet on a football game, you can bet on a baseball game, but you won't be able to bet on a horse racing from any approved mobile sports platform here in Georgia.
Even on another track?
Yeah, because the bet would actually take place, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, would take place within the confines of the state of Georgia.
Okay. That would apply to NASCAR as well? Or
Yeah,
no?
I mean, I believe NASCAR is permitted under it. It's not horse racing specifically.
The principal limitation there is the Constitution's restriction on parimutuel. And parimutuel is a specific kind of betting that is commonly used with horse racing, right? Where you're betting on kind of the winners and then you have the stakes. That's different than line betting or prop betting. So you would be able to bet on NASCAR. I don't know if the bill specifically calls out horse racing as a prohibited event. I can certainly look that up. But the intent here, I believe, is that you would be able to bet on the outcome of a NASCAR race as long as the bet is not structured as a parimutuel.
I gotcha.
And
That makes
we
sense.
can fine tune that if it makes you feel better.
I'm just curious. Just trying to get a grasp of this whole thing here. That's all I got for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, I recognize Senator Albers for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whomever could answer this, for many years, I've always felt that this is an open issue because it's not been defined as legal nor not legal, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but years ago we had a former Attorney General kind of issue an opinion letter which maybe even made it more vague. So am I right to say that there's still no clarity of whether this is legal or illegal in Georgia law?
So that's a good question. Nick, I'll let you follow up with me, but
Well, this definitely makes it legal.
yeah.
Well, I understand.
I think there's a gray area. I think people have questions about the legality or the constitutionality. I think there's a lot of consensus. It's obviously not universal that you could pass this bill and it would be legal in every regard. And so I think that's probably the most important thing right now. I know that previously we've had legislation in regards to fantasy sports specifically, not sports wagering. And there was a question, that may have been the legal ruling you were talking about or the opinion. So I think the most important thing is if we do this, it will be clear in the law. Nick, do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, that's correct. So, I think that there is a general lack of clarity in the Georgia statutes and to some extent even the Constitution as to what is prohibited, what is not prohibited. And certainly neighboring states, Alabama and Tennessee, have both concluded in one form or another, mostly through AG opinions, that skill is the predominant factor in sports betting, which would open the door to maybe it is perhaps legal in Georgia today. But I think the most important thing is to create a regulatory framework that makes sense. One, clarifies it for operators and those who want to participate in betting. Number two, and then ensures that the funding goes, it's taxed and that the funding goes to designated recipients. It's certainly not our desire to turn on sports betting today in Georgia and hope that it passes muster in court. It's much more preferable to have a robust bill like this one that would provide operational certainty and protect consumers.
And also, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Albers, some council says it's already illegal and some council say it could be legal. And we realize that lawyers have to eat too. Isn't that right, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
Could I have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Thank you. So with that being said, I think the ambiguity has had people just doing it anyway, right?
And that is true.
And doing it anyway, isn't it true that without having basic consumer protections and missing the opportunity to put the lottery involved, we're actually, putting both the revenue at risk that we could have for our students, as well as the person who's playing who doesn't know. It's not the Georgia citizens' job to try and decipher those opinions at risk because they won't have the basic consumer protections in place should that person not want to pay them back.
Absolutely. We agree with that completely.
Thank you.
Bill, let me ask you, from your perspective and your legal studies, is sports betting a game of skill or a game of chance?
So I can take that question. I think first it depends on what you would characterize as a game of skill and game of chance. You know, some states have a material element test, some states have a predominant factor test. There's a thread line in Georgia case law, the Ultra Telecom case from the Georgia Supreme Court in 2010 in particular, that suggests that the legislature in Georgia has the authority to authorize anything that contains at least some element of skill. In that case, it was actually a coin-operated device that you spin around or something, and it's mostly determined by chance there, but I guess there was some ability to influence where the coin landed. And the dissent in that case said, well, we can't allow this because the Constitution doesn't allow this. And the majority had no concern with that argument at all. So, you know, I think taking that, certainly there is absolutely some element of skill in sports betting. And I'll be the first to admit that I'm a terrible sports bettor because I don't follow sports closely enough, at least, you know, outside of college football. And so there is a strategy and a skill and a knowledge that comes with it. The determinative issue, I think, in Georgia is really, is there some skill? Yes. Two, even if there isn't, does it qualify as a lottery game? And the answer to that, I believe, is yes. If you have it run by the lottery, any game of chance is effectively a lottery at that point, so long as it goes to the Hope Scholarship. And three, could it be characterized as a casino game, which is a unique term in the Georgia Constitution? It pops up in some states, that I think really denotes a type and a form of gaming that you would find on a casino floor, brick and mortar, where you can go, turn of the card, roll the dice, spin of a roulette wheel, and sports betting does not fit within that framework. So the long story short being, is it a game of skill, game of chance? It's enough skill that it can certainly be authorized and played in Georgia pursuant to statute.
But unfortunately, the definition of a lottery game, which this bill is trying to have the lottery run sports betting as a lottery game, by definition means any game of chance. Does not provide the lottery authority to run skill-based games. But, so we may need to rehash this and maybe not be run under the lottery if it's gonna. So that's our fine legal challenge. In order for it to already be legal under our Constitution, it has to be a lottery game. To be a lottery game, it has to be only a game of chance. So we're either going to have a constitutional amendment approving games of skill, gambling on sporting events, or else we're going to have to agree this is a game of chance or amend that provision. It's hairy, so to speak. All right, we get up. If you have further comment, go ahead. If not, I know Robert Highsmith is here. He's a legal scholar and expert on these subject matters, may testify shortly.
Yeah, if I may, one comment with respect to that. You know, I don't think that there is any dispute that chance plays a significant role in sports betting, where it falls on the line between predominant factor, you know, versus entirely skill. I think every state has a different view of that. And so in Georgia, where it is not clear, in my view, as to where that dividing line is, that there is room for the legislature to determine what constitutes a game of chance. That was certainly the case in the Ultra Telecom case, where the court said, well, the legislature at some point does get to fill in the gaps. And I understand that the Constitution provides those necessary guardrails. But in this particular instance, where the voters certainly created the lottery to run a broad spectrum of games that are not, for example, a tournament. You know, if you and I were to go out and play golf today and wager money on who's going to win the next hole, that's almost certainly a game of skill, right? There's very little or if no any chance involved in that. The lottery couldn't run that. I would agree with you. But where you are hazarding money on the play of somebody else, that is significantly outside of your control as to how the outcome of that game operates. And that's that key element of chance that would allow it to be a lottery. And especially if the legislature were to express its will that it is a lottery game that could be run by the lottery and used to fund the Hope Scholarship Program.
Right, other members have questions? Senator Tippins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mackey, I'd call your attention to Part 5, starting on page 898 on page 36, when it talks about the winnings and what the state would derive out of it. Can you give me a definition of adjusted gross income? It's not in the defined terms in Part 1.
So there is a definition of adjusted gross income in the legislation. It's just not in Part 5. It is on page 10, line 223.
I was looking at the definitions on page 2.
There's a lot of definitions.
Okay, so any monies that are paid out to the winners are deducted from the gross income, is that correct?
Yes.
If I may ask another question,
Proceed.
under the Georgia lottery, when someone places a $100 bet, okay? What percentage of that does the state lottery commission receive that they forward to education? Are you aware of that?
I don't know off the top of my head. I know at times it's probably a varying percentage, but no, I don't know.
Okay. Could you tell me, based on the information of other states, what percentage the winnings are in those states on average that have sports betting?
The percentage of winnings based on in other states?
Of total what percent of the total wagers does the category winnings comprise?
Make up of the wages? Nick, do you have any idea on that? That might get tricky state by state.
Yeah, and I can certainly get that information for you on a state-by-state basis, and we can do that very quickly. If I may infer where I think you're going with these questions is that there is money coming in, money going out, and that the tax only applies to the money that stays basically with the operator, right? It is not a tax on the total, what we would call handle, the total amount bet. And the estimates for revenue from the authoritative Oxford Economics Report in Georgia is that we estimate at scale $40 million a year in tax revenue. So that's not the amount that is bet, that's the actual money being paid out to the Georgia lottery from operators in Georgia that will go to fund the scholarship programs. So that's a 10% tax on the adjusted gross income of the operators. The handle, the amount bet, would be obviously significantly more than that, because if I bet $100 on the Braves to win a game, I may win that bet, I may lose that bet. If I win it, I may get paid out $200. So there is a netting out of the prizes awarded, for lack of a better term, before you calculate the amount of tax. But I think the total amount going into the Georgia lottery would be somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, just north of $40 million is the best estimate.
If I may do a follow-up, I believe that the Georgia lottery right now pays roughly 26.5% of the total wagers, not of the total adjusted gross income, but they pay 26.5% of total wager. This bill, if I understand it correctly, I want you to pick a number of what you think the percentage of adjusted gross income would be on this type bidding. what percent is the adjusted gross income of total wages cast?
I don't know that. If I gave you a number, I'd be making it up right now.
Well, let's say it's 70% or 60%. Actually, what you'd be winding up with is you're gonna get 10% of the remaining 40%, which is it's gonna net you 4% of the total wages, which compares to what you're looking at on the state lottery when we're getting 26.5%, which is a six-fold increase over that. Whatever that number is, I think before the state makes a critical decision, are we gonna authorize money that may be diverted from the Georgia lottery that we get 26.5% on to a platform that we're getting only 4% on? Now, I understand full well that these are dollars that are not being taxed now. But I mean, you know, if there's any money diverted, we're gonna have to do a lot more to make up for what we're losing for lottery if it comes out of lottery. That's the only point I'm making. I mean, we're netting so much more percentage-wise from the lottery than we are any of the other bills that I've seen come before us. This doesn't go to the moral side of it. This doesn't go to is it okay or not okay? This is just general finance. This does not net the state nearly the amount that the lottery does. And I think we need to take that in consideration when we consider these bills.
It doesn't, but it adds to that.
I don't disagree with that at all.
I mean, maybe a 75 million to 100 million. We don't know. Tennessee's first year, and they believe they'll do 50, and we're a lot bigger than they are.
Well.
So I can't give you a definite number on what the possibility is. However, it's extra money. It doesn't take away from the lottery. This money, if there any administration, will be handled through that. So it's only additional money.
And if I may, Senator, you know, a number of other states with lotteries have enacted legalized mobile sports wagering. I'm not aware of any state that has said we've suffered a loss in lottery revenue because we've legalized sports wagering.
Thank you very much.
Bill, could I get you to get that information to me that you said you could rapidly get from other states? Essentially, it sounds like you're going to get the total amounts betted and the total profit to the operators or bookmakers. We have some.
Yeah,
that
it would be total handle and the amount of tax revenue.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can get those figures where they're available.
And
We'll
Josh
work on-
can get it to me, or y'all give him my contact.
We'll work on
look
getting
at
that to you by Monday. Yeah.
Senator Rhett, I recognize you for a question.
In this bill, are you able to vote, I mean, not vote, make a bet online?
Yeah,
one point?
yeah. So the setup here, you know, so for the groups I represent, FanDuel, DraftKings, BetMGM, that Nick also works with, they are online platforms that you can go on a phone, a tablet, you know, computer, and you make the bets through their portals online. And everything's geofenced. So, like, for example, with Tennessee having legalized this already, if you go to Tennessee and you go to, you know, FanDuel or BetMGM.com, you can make a bet as long as you're within the boundaries of the state of Tennessee.
What safeguards are in place to make sure that the person is over age 21?
There's an outline in the bill. There's a ton of safeguards. All of these companies use current processes for identifying the individuals when they register based on their name. I believe they may have to give the last four of their social security number. There's, you know, it's already been vetted with all these companies in terms of setting up that process. And then if, you know, they use companies like LexisNexis, which have data on all of us, and same entities that credit entities use to verify people, you know, who say, you know, I am Josh Mackey. And if the information you provide doesn't match up, then you have to then provide even more additional information to verify that person, that you are who you say you are, that you're within the legal age parameter.
So this would help verify that the senator from the 53rd is over 21?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you.
It'd be questionable.
Pro Tem, did you have a question?
Yes, I do.
All right, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Mackey, for being here today and for the presentation. And relative to Chairman Tippin's question, and I see exactly where he's going there. I think I do. that based on his statement, these are not additional dollars, these are dollars that will be taken from another source, which would be the lottery. Do we have any figure on or estimation on what is currently being illegally wagered in Georgia? I mean, is there anybody that's got a number on that? The GBI, FBI, IUD, EUI?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Two years ago, the American Gaming Association, along with Oxford Economics, did a report where they estimate that there's $150 billion annually in the country, and that for Georgia's portion of that, there's $4.8 billion wagered illegally currently.
$4.8 billion in sports betting wagered currently.
Yes, that was their estimation.
And also, Senator, if you don't mind, and to go back to Senator Tippin's questions, the people who bet on sports wagering are not normally the same people that buy lottery. I mean, look, I wish I bought lottery every time, and I rarely do. I only think I need it when it's like several hundred million, and so I rarely play, but there's some people that play that religiously. Now, sports betting is just a different group of people. They're more sports-minded, and I don't want to say athletic, but they would play this whether they don't play the lottery. So I think it's only a major addition, too.
So go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, that sounds like a large number. It is a large number. I would hope that that turns out to be true. You do have to keep one thing in mind, that currently people are betting offshore with illegal entities, or if they travel there, if they travel to Tennessee, they're betting in Tennessee legally. Part of the framework and structure of this effort to bring it under a regulatory body is still to also make it enticing for people to conduct this legally. So, you know, if we put some things too high, if we put thresholds too high within the law that we pass, it will disincentivize people to come into the legal market. So depending on how this all plays out, we may hit that number, we may not. That's just an estimate from 2 years ago about how much they anticipate is actually taking place.
Gotcha. So, probably in my mind, Tennessee legalized it when?
They legalized it in 2019. Is that correct, Nick?
2019. So they've had.
And
How long have they been operating?
since November 1st of last year,
November 1st.
so not very long.
Okay. So what about our neighboring states? So, for instance, a comparable size state, what are they wagering? So a state that's got 10 million people in it, what are they wagering? Do we know?
They had, in the first 2 months, they had $312 million in wagers placed.
That was Tennessee. Do we know of a
Yes, sir.
state that's a comparable size of Georgia, and do we know the amount that they are currently wagering?
We don't. So, for example, Virginia just legalized it, and they have just taken in applications, so they haven't started it. North Carolina, comparable state, only allows it on tribal lands, you know, and if you go to North Carolina, they have 2 casinos operating. So that's, you know, not available statewide, so that's not really comparable, and we don't have numbers on that. New York and Pennsylvania, which are bigger states, have legalized this, but they both also have casino operations, so it's a little bit different in terms of their revenue. Nick, do you have any comments on that in addition to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally in this space, you know, I know Tennessee does not have the same raw population as Georgia, and certainly doesn't have a major metropolitan center like Atlanta. But, you know, extrapolating per capita, I think that you would expect to go up or down based on what Tennessee did. New Jersey had a very good year in 2020. It was $6 billion in wagers. That skewed slightly because of the New York traffic. So sports betting is not legal in New York, and there is a significant amount of wagering that comes across the river into New Jersey. I think you would probably expect some amount of Tennessee's numbers would be derived from Georgians who are either visiting Tennessee or crossing the border specifically to place bets. And so it's not a perfect one for one, but you know, even at a $312 million handle in 2 months, that's a really very significant amount of betting. And I think that would be highly predictive of the potential tax revenue here. And to keep in mind that those are just the first 2 months. I mean, that's not even as it gets up to scale. I mean, there is a certain amount of on-ramping time as people migrate from the illegal market into the legal market. You know, tourism, I think, around sports betting will increase in Tennessee over time. I think Georgia could expect the same. Also, Tennessee doesn't have the sports culture that Georgia does, frankly, right? I mean, with the number of professional sports teams in Georgia, and certainly the accretive economic impact for those sports teams is not something that Tennessee would realize to the same extent that Georgia would.
So currently, $4.8 billion is being wagered in Georgia illegally, in addition to our lottery proceeds.
Yes, that's the estimate. Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you. Nothing else at the moment.
Okay, recognize Senator Brass for two quick questions, and I'll be back to you, Senator Tippins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, I saw in the bill a definition for fantasy sports. Is that in, I can't find any language on fantasy sports outside of that. Is that included in sports betting?
I know we have a definition, but I don't believe no, it is not included. Nick, am I correct on that? But I'm pretty sure it's not.
That's right.
Because that's a game of skill, I guess, or.
That's what they said.
That's correct. That's so. Of course, Daily Fantasy Sports is operational in Georgia today. It's been operating for a number of years. The intent here is not to bring Daily Fantasy Sports into this regulatory structure. That being a different game, and I think involving significantly more skill than much of sports wagering. And so it's defined here for purposes of exclusion.
Okay. And for the record, it's all betting is a game of skill when you win, and it's bad luck when you lose. But
fair enough.
So
fair
that's
enough.
just my that's what I'm told. Now, my real question, or my serious question here, I want to go back to the credit cards. So if we look at line 566, it says a licensee shall not knowingly offer, accept, or extend credit to a bettor. So in this case, are we saying the credit card is extending the credit to the bettor?
Mm-mm. No, I believe we're saying it's a form of payment. It is not an extension of credit. No.
Okay, and then I guess a follow-up to that is if they go to get redeemed, let's say, I don't know, let's say you win, let's say my credit card balance is zero when I walk in the store at the beginning of the game, and I put $100 on the Falcons to win, and of course I lose. And so, or no, let's flip that. Let's say I win. And they come back, and let's say I even did another one. Well, maybe this isn't gonna. If I win more than I bet, and my balance of my credit card goes in the positive, now my credit card's turned into a bank. They don't do that. Is that? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, it would go in an account, but it's not. You're not going to get money back on your credit card. No, that's not how that would work.
So how is it redeemable? Would it be payable back in cash? Was it? I mean, do you see what I'm saying there? Like a debit card is one thing. I go in, I bet 100, I won. Let's say I won. I took an odds game and I won 200, so I get that debited back into my account. If I do that on a credit card, then my balance is they owe me money, and typically a credit card isn't going to do that. So how would that work? How is it redeemable? And then I guess taking it a little step further, I think one of the reasons that's there, and one of the issues a lot of people have with betting is when, the bookie extends credit. And we're trying to get away from that, I would assume. And when the bookie extends credit, that's typically when people get in trouble. They bet money they don't have. And that's where they get in real trouble. And if we're going to do a credit card, and I'll talk with the author offline on this, but if we're going to do a credit card, you're allowing people to bet money they don't have, essentially. And I think that's where we could run into some issues of people running into real problems.
Yeah.
And I would feel better if we only did debit cards, possibly add a Venmo and a PayPal, those types of pay sources, and then of course cash. But at least that way, people are betting money they actually have and not money they don't have. And I guess my question I would like to know is exactly how do you redeem your winnings?
So I'm going to answer part of this. I'm going to let Nick specifically answer the redemption part. But the way the bill is structured is that you have an account. Like if you go to BetMGM, you have an account, and it's about how you fund that account. And so in the bill, you can do an electronic bank transfer, and that would be inclusive of a Venmo or a Cash App or something like that, and a debit or credit card. So you're depositing money into that account from those. So
Okay,
your credit
got it.
card would be charged. In terms of your concern about using credit cards, completely understand that's been brought. You're not the first one to bring that up, and I think that's part of the debate and the vetting process here in the Senate. The one thing I would say is that from our perspective is that offshore gaming is almost exclusively credit card. I don't want to say, I mean, I probably shouldn't say exclusively. It's largely credit card. And so, again, when you get back to we're going to legalize this, we're going to license it, we're going to regulate it, we need to bring people, into the light, away from offshore entities, not allowing credit cards to be used for depositing an account will disincentivize people to do that. Obviously, that's, I think, probably the biggest argument to include credit cards. But, there is that concern, and again, that's part of this process to figure out what makes y'all comfortable.
And when you say offshore companies, meaning the licensees?
Yeah, so like our clients are not offshore. We are, operating in the U.S. legally, but, you can go to websites that are offshore outside of the U.S. Like if you go to any illegal site, it's usually offshore outside the U.S., maybe in the Caribbean, maybe somewhere else. And they take credit card processing, and obviously
I don't
that's
have a problem getting rid of them.
That's not within our wheelhouse. We're trying to get people to move away from that to legalized betting.
Okay.
Nick,
Thank
did you have a comment about the redemption?
Yeah, so there's a ledger basically kept in your account, and you can withdraw it whenever you want to your original funding source or otherwise. So in that regard, whether somebody's funding it with, if I fund it with my credit card, but then I withdraw it into my bank account, then I just pay the credit card from my bank account. So regardless, the money is still going back to the bettor for use on the credit card. But I think that the credit card point is an important segue into the responsible gaming aspect of this. So one, if people want to bet with credit, they're going to find a way to bet with credit, and they're going to do it online legally. They're doing it today. One of the key goals here is to not just offer a legal alternative to the offshore market, but to offer an attractive legal alternative. Otherwise, people will just continue with what they already know. And I think the people who are in trouble with gaming will game, whether it's with their offshore sports book or the local bookie at their favorite, bar. And those guys may actually extend credit, and that's not a good situation for folks to be in. Two, I think there's an assumption with respect built into your question about betting with credit cards that people are betting with money they don't have. Frankly, I use my credit card for everything because I like to get Delta points, right? And so that just means that's the most convenient way for me to do it, but it doesn't mean that I'm not gaming responsibly. But most importantly is the framework here that puts the burden on these companies to act responsibly with respect to problem gaming. With disclosures, with programs, it sets up a requirement that the lottery create programs with respect to problem gaming. And, these offshore operators, we don't know who they are. We don't know who the bookie is. DraftKings is a publicly traded company. BetMGM is a joint venture with MGM, one of the biggest names in gaming there is. FanDuel, similarly, is a household name, licensed, regulated. And if those folks step outside of the lines, there's a real consequence for them with the Lottery Corporation in Georgia and every other state where they operate, right? Missteps in Georgia kind of flow across the country. And so there's an actual accountability there as opposed to whatever is going on right now in Georgia with these offshore sports books. And so whether it's credit cards or, folks just spending their rent money, right? We have no interest in anybody doing that and getting upside down and engaging in irresponsible play, regardless of how they fund it.
Senator Tippins, if you'll allow me, before I lose this thought, Nick, while we're on the responsible gaming, that's going to be something we're going to make certain will be in this bill if it comes up to a vote. I didn't see much in this bill as far as responsible gaming or keeping people from spending money they can't afford to lose. I, looked briefly at some of the other states' provisions for that, and I think it's a little difficult just for the bettor themselves to be responsible to say, hey, don't let me bet. I got a problem. I was a little bit impressed with New Jersey, where they allow the bettors to set a limit on either a daily, weekly, or monthly basis how much they're allowed to bet, or the maximum amount they can lose during that period. Have you seen any states that where the state imposes that limitation on the bettor instead of them self-imposing it, maybe based on their income or financial statement, just kind of like, getting a credit card, or, how much would you be allowed to bet so we could keep them from spending the grocery money, basically?
I think first thing,
I was asking Nick, but you're welcome to answer.
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
I just
Sorry,
thought
it's a little hard.
Sorry
I don't want to
for
chime in if it's not my turn, but it's hard to
What
tell
I
on
said,
Zoom. Thank you
know
for
about
the
all these other
indulgence.
states
Yeah.
you'd help, so I thought you might know how
Yeah.
someone handled it.
No, I don't know of another state that's taken that approach, which I think would be very problematic just in terms of the practicality of it. What I think we find operationally is that when the self-help remedies are provided, that people do take advantage of them, that they are extremely helpful. And one, I think, key component in this bill is not only can you impose those limits yourself with one operator, but you can tell that operator and give that operator permission to share your name and your limit with the lottery corporation, who will then disseminate that information to all the other licensees. So, I might decide, hey, I got a little carried away with my losses. I'm starting to chase losses. I'm going to call up, my preferred operator or use their self-help form and impose a self-limitation. But then 6 hours later, when I'm watching the game, I, log into another operator. In Georgia, this bill creates a mechanism where that can be shared across the licensees. And I think that's incredibly powerful. I think people do generally have a good sense of when they've gotten upside down. We do things internally at the different companies, and every company has their own responsible gaming personnel who are devoted to this and ways in which they are tracking bettors and trying to avoid these situations. It's hard to build that into law. And so, what we're trying to do here is provide a minimum baseline that all operators need to adhere to, and that's the self limits and the voluntary self-exclusion and the helplines. But of course, we would be happy to talk to you about some other things that other states have done and put into their law that can be very effective as well. So there may be more things that we could be doing here, and happy to talk to you about that.
There are several things in the law, including the New Jersey example of the player self-limit that is included in this bill too.
Okay,
So,
thanks, Josh. Senator Tippins.
Josh, if you would, for the committee, maybe by Monday, get us a listing of the 6 states that are geographically closest to Georgia, based on their latest closure of the fiscal year. If you would provide us the total amount of wages that were placed under sports betting and the total or the percentage of adjusted gross income on each of those 4 states.
6 closest states bordering Georgia.
6 closest states, the total amounts wagered that came through their programs, and the total wages placed under the program, and the adjusted gross income for those 6 states.
All right, we'll do that. Offhand, I know it's Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, West Virginia are probably the 4 closest.
Tennessee, you don't have but 2 months.
We only have 2 months.
I'd modify that to be that have operated for at least a year.
Okay, I'll check on that. A lot of this is new, but we'll look at the 6 closest states operated for a year.
Okay.
That's going to be tricky because this didn't get legalized in 2019. U.S. Supreme Court. So I think New Jersey was the first one, right, Nick?
Yeah. We can just get the 6 closest states then and see
Okay.
where they're at.
Just good enough. Senator Lucas, is that you just dreaming, or is that hand raised because we got a question?
I don't know whether it's a question or a statement, Mr. Chairman.
I'll recognize you for either. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have is whether or not you're going to place a limit on what somebody can bet. The lottery is 3 times a day, midday, evening, and night. I know folks that play 3 sessions and play $500 a session to the lottery to take a chance on winning. Because the chance on winning is if you win, you get paid. Not like the old days where you had the bookie and you had the numbers and you placed your bet, and then the bookie took the money, and you couldn't go to the law and say anything to the law about it because it was illegal in the very beginning. So I question whether or not you put a limit on somebody that's gambling, period. Gambling is a chance. You take a chance on winning, and you take a chance on losing. And that's the name of the game.
All righty, thank you. Appreciate you, Mr. Mackey. Question? All right, we've got several other speakers signed up, so if you
Thank you,
just sort of
Chairman. We
stay
appreciate it.
handy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm gonna call, I hope y'all can hear me out in the hall, Virginia Galloway, Faith and Freedom Coalition. Yes, sir. Recognize Mr. Pro Tem.
Some of our questions, I think my questions were along some of the lines you had, Chairman Tippins. Line 223, adjusted gross income is defined there on line 223, page 10. And relative to your question on percentages on local states, I'll make you a copy of this. I came across it from the Tax Foundation calculator on the various states, how much their percentages.
All right. Ms. Galloway, please
Hey,
introduce
good
yourself,
afternoon.
and we'd love to have your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on behalf of Faith and Freedom Coalition. And I know we've kind of visited on this before because it kind of comes back every year. But the good thing about that is it's given us a lot of time to get a lot of information of things that you guys would want to consider before you voted on this legislation. The first would be, and I apologize for not bringing the paper version, but I do have it on email, and I can bring you a paper version if everybody would like to see it. But that would be the 2016 opinion by our Attorney General. It's an informal opinion, but it was requested by a member of the Georgia Senate as to whether a constitutional requirement was needed to do sports gambling. And the opinion said that, yes, it does need to have the constitutional amendment. So I'd be happy to share that letter.
We could use that.
Okay.
That might have been focused on fantasy sports only, but I'd like to see it. If you can get that to us, I imagine I have it in one of my files, but probably easier for you to find it than me.
Yeah, I've got it right up on my phone, so.
There also was a study committee, not this summer, but last summer, 2019, Senator Beach chaired, and the Legislative Council gave us an opinion that had the same conclusion.
Correct.
But there are varying interpretations of that, okay?
Okay. All right. Also, ESPN did a study of sports gambling in 2018. They found a couple of things that were interesting, I think, maybe to you guys. Out of 500,000 accounts that they studied, only 50 winning accounts existed. So that's a really devastating percentage. So basically, are we willing to open up our state to that kind of basically fraudulent scheme and business. Also, if they do win, after a certain period of time, they start blocking them. The companies block them from being able to gamble. In the UK, 3/4 of sports gamblers have either borrowed or sold something so that they can continue to gamble. And also in the UK, because it's very prevalent there, and they're actually fighting it again over there. They're rethinking whether this is a good idea there, because children 11 to 16 years old, where it's illegal for them to do this, more of them are regular sports gamblers, not one time, but regular sports gamblers, than have tried cigarettes, drugs, and alcohol combined. So Georgia right now is number 40 in the place best states to raise a family. I kind of would question that myself, because I've enjoyed raising my family here. I've lived here all my life. But I want you guys to think about, would sports gambling make us a better state to raise a family in, or a worse state with the problems that it brings to the state? We're number 1 state to do business without sports gambling. Why would we mess that up? When you have sports gambling legalized, it does not decrease the amount of illegal sports betting. It actually increases it. And some of the contrast between illegal gambling operators and government-sanctioned gambling operators is that no illegal gambling operator can put a lien on your home, or to collect the gambling losses like legal operators can. No illegal operator sends free gambling wagers by direct mail to your house to lure you back like legal operators do. No illegal operator is pushing $30 lottery scratch tickets 7 days a week in economically depressed communities like state lotteries do already. No illegal operators are running gambling ads during live broadcast of sporting events with such intensity that 1 out of every 5 ads is to place a bet, which is what they're doing in many places where it is legal. So I would just like to remind you once again the ABCs of gambling: addiction, bankruptcy, and crime. And I could do probably every letter of the alphabet and talk about the bad things that happen to a state when they allow gambling, but I'm just going to skip all the way over to P, and I'm going to talk about priorities. We have spent a ton of time, effort in this state over the last several years, instead of solving problems, talking about gambling and bringing in another thing that would be harmful to our families, that would not be a financially wise decision for our state. And I would just ask you, as a lifetime Georgia citizen, to really think through this. From a bipartisan perspective, it's a bad idea. It's fiscally irresponsible. It's also socially irresponsible. It does not lead to more economic justice for anyone. So I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I don't see any questions, but thank you for being here, and I'll ask Mr. Joshua Johnson to please step in the room and give us your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I appreciate the opportunity today. I'm going to be reading my statement, so I'll go as quickly as I possibly can here. My name is Joshua Johnson. I'm a pastor in Gwinnett County, Georgia. Pastors in churches have been referred to as the conscience of the community. For the past 20 years, I have worked to help many people out of the kind of vices that are being proposed for legalization and regulation today. Sports betting has been proven in 2020 during the coronavirus pandemic to be one of the most, if not the most, addictive forms of gambling in existence. Because of its ease of accessibility and functionality, by simply tapping the screen of a mobile device, lives are being ruined. Gambling addictions and drug addictions share the same neural processes and are both arguably equally harmful. Addictive activities are based upon impulsive behaviors. Therefore, many people who become involved in sports gambling on a regular basis are not thinking clearly, but impulsively. I pastored previously, before I was here in Georgia, I pastored in Indiana. And in that state, they legalized and started regulating sports gambling December 31st, 2019. Fort Wayne, Indiana, just recently alone, just in Fort Wayne, reported that a 600% increase in their addictions hotline. In the state of Tennessee, as has been mentioned recently, from January 2020 to January 2021 has experienced an 847% increase in calls to their addictions hotline. It would seem to me that if you have to put a phone number on something so people can call for help because they're utilizing the services of that product, even those people who produce that service understand that it can be and it is harmful. The number one reason for relationships to end is money problems. And passing this bill will only increase the number of failed relationships, broken homes, destitute citizens, and addicted people. Simply putting a phone number in a visible location for those who are gambling to call if they feel they need help with an addiction simply is not enough. Most people who have a gambling addiction do not realize it or do not see it as a problem. But ask the spouse of that person who's struggling to make the ends meet in their household budget. Ask the children in those homes whose shoes are too small, their clothes are worn out, who can't play on the sports teams they want to play on simply because mom and dad lost their money on sports gambling. According to John Kent, Professor Emeritus of Business Administration at University of Illinois, and I quote, "If you combine sports gambling and smartphones, you're looking at an economic disaster on multiple fronts. Virtually every piece of academic research says this is a bad idea for any number of reasons, but the big ones are the effect on the economy and the creation of more addicted gamblers at a younger age," end quote. According to Kent's research, and I quote again, there are between $3 and $7 in taxpayer costs for every $1 in tax revenues from casinos, and sports gambling carries an even higher socioeconomic cost. Protecting gambling on mobile devices by legalizing it and monitoring it in order to benefit from the revenues is actually opening Pandora's box. Combining gambling, sports, and smartphones, which are all addictive to some degree, will lead sports fans down a very dangerous path to financial ruin. In the day and age we live in, if anything, we should be pushing professional sports more in the direction of protecting the integrity of each sport, not toward gambling. There is no monitoring, regulation, or legislation that will keep people from this sort of thing. But I believe it would be a shame for those in this room who are responsible for accurately representing their constituents in this great state of Georgia to pass this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mike Griffin. And then if Robert Highsmith, if you want to come on in our room, you're welcome to, and we'll have you on deck. Trying to get us out of here in 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I do have a handout. I handed some out yesterday. I got 11 copies. I don't know who I need to give this to. But
Cindy, and she'll take care of it.
Cindy will let you
We'll deal with that.
If you got, yeah, you got one yesterday.
Yeah, I got one already.
Got one. Reading that on you. Just a little humor, just a little bit. I'm telling you, it's a lot of. Here's another one we can pass around because y'all asked for this. I'm gonna give you what you asked for. I'm gonna lay it right here, ma'am. You can just hand that. I don't know if it's got enough time to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Griffin. I'm Public Affairs Representative with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. Just giving you a handout. I'm not going to rehash everything I've already said before, but I just want to accentuate this point. We cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good, By that meaning, there's always going to be illegal gambling. I mean, there really is. It's a fire that's always going to be around. And the issue is, do we want it worse or do we want it better? And a lot of the arguments here today, respectfully, have been that legalizing this carries with it a premise that it will make it better. It's just not true, in my opinion, of what we've seen by way of all the ramifications. If you have a fire, for example, and you put gasoline on it, it gets worse. If you put water on it, there's potential to knock it back down some. And there's no doubt that making this legal in our state is going to make what's already here worse. We're not trying to stop the illegal gambling now. And I don't think there's going to be a great incentive to stop the illegal gambling even after this is passed, because I've seen this through the years of 35 and a half years of pastoring in the state. I'm not wanting to get into alcohol arguments and all the other things we've dealt with. But my point is, when we're looking at moving forward and other things when it comes to illegal drugs, when it comes to prostitution, you're going to hear the same arguments one day saying, well, that's why we need to legalize this. That's why we need to legalize this, because we'll be able to regulate it. We'll be able, because they're doing it anyway. We'll get tax revenue from it. It'll help the children. You know, I'm just saying all these ramifications can be used once again. And really, I thought it would be a far-fetched idea that anybody, and I'm not saying this committee would ever think about it, about legalizing prostitution. But it's happening in the Northeast. It's happening in Nevada. It's already happening over in Europe. And it was done as a pretense to try to get a control on the prostitution and sex trafficking. Actually, it's made it worse. And so there's some things you just have to kind of try to keep it at the minimum. And there's no doubt when I give you this information here, this is not going to remain neutral. We're just going to give them another option. No. It's going to be constantly advertisements plaguing people, trying to get them to be involved in it more. Why? Because it's going to be legal. If you look on the back, and I'm not saying that this is true today, and one of the gentlemen are sitting here today, but it was Bloomberg, the Business Weekly, Bloomberg News Agency, with their magazine, it says porn giant Vivid wants to rescue daily fantasy sports, and that was back in 2016, which means there has been seen a connection between pornography and online gambling. And it's not that they're going to show you pornography, they're going to tempt you, they're going to put things out there to try to entice you to come to it. And so my point is, when you legalize it, you've just expanded that border. And then if you look over here, and again, it goes back to when we were dealing with daily fantasy sports. You know, one of their snapshots showed that there were 10 million children out of 51 million being involved in this. And this, I don't remember exactly in this bill as I did over in the House bill, it legalizes esports, which is your Xbox and all those games as well. So I'm just saying, this puts tentacles out to children, and it's preparing children to get ready to gamble. Again, but they're already doing it. They're already doing this already, already doing this already. But this will be the gasoline that just keeps it even going more. And in some cases, there could be some regulation that you don't have in other areas. But also in other areas, I don't think you're going to stop the illegal operations. I don't see the motivation to get out there and stop it, because now the legal guys have got to compete with the illegal ones, and the illegal ones are going to give them better deals. And when's the last time you saw a bookie go out of business? Gambling's about losing. And that's where the regulations are trying to control that to some extent, but you're just going to expand the borders, which are very narrow now, but they're just going to be wider. That's our concern about that.
Senator Mullis, I recognize you for a question.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate our discussions.
Yes, sir.
I am pro-life, by the way. I would like to ask you this. Are you for gambling?
Am I for gambling?
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, I'm trying to get a yes or no, because I want to go further with this. You're
Yes.
not for gambling.
I'm
That'd
not
be
for
a no.
pushing gambling. No, I'm not for
Well,
pushing
if you
gambling.
are not for gambling and your friends out in the hall are not for gambling, why don't y'all work on trying to dissolve the Hope Scholarship? I'm not know if you're aware, but that is gambling money. That is that is gambling. That is legal by the state of Georgia, and Georgia currently has a monopoly on gambling. So why don't y'all work on dissolving?
You want to
Hope
have a
Scholarship?
session on that, and we can talk about how it's increased tuition, and the tuition price will just gobble up all the extra money you're getting and all the other things that are going on. But
We'll hold
again,
that
I'm
for
not
another
against,
day.
that's not what this is about.
We got 10 minutes left on
Right,
this.
this is not what this is about. Our point here is, let's draw a line and just say we don't need any more. That's all we're talking about. We're not, that's the same way when we deal with alcohol regulations. we're not here for prohibition. We're saying let's continue to make sure that public health and safety standards are as high as possible.
All right, thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you,
us
Mr.
again,
Chairman.
Mr.
I
Highsmith.
really
hate to
appreciate your
have you
time.
on such a short fuse,
Thank you.
but we need to hear from you. You represent the Atlanta Hawks, and you'll be the first pro team that's even weighed in on this.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to take all of the 10 minutes. Thank you for having me. I do represent the Atlanta Hawks. Worked on this issue for many years. Testified, Mr. Chairman, in your committee just last year. Seems like a lot longer ago, given everything we're going through. But and also in the study committee that Senator Beach chaired in 2019 that the chairman mentioned. I'm only here, Mr. Chairman, to talk about this constitutional issue that has formed a lot of the legal debate around the question, and that is, can we do something like Senator Mullis's bill without amending the Constitution? It's our opinion that you can, but I want to say at the very outset, Mr. Chairman, that I readily acknowledge it would be cleaner and would eliminate the argument about the constitutionality under the state constitution if you did amend the Constitution. I won't contest that it would be cleaner and would eliminate that debate. But I also, if we were to do that, Mr. Chairman, it would be 2023 at the earliest before anything could become effective, because, of course, constitutional amendments would go on the ballot in 2022. And so I think it's important that the committee and the Senate and the bodies and the House understand that you can do it without a constitutional amendment. Here's why we believe that, Mr. Chairman. The Constitution, the state Constitution, only prohibits casino gambling. That's the defined term. And Mr. Chairman, the chairman knows all this. I'm just going to try to give the basics of it. I know that the chairman has made a deep study of many of these things. Casino gambling. That term is not defined. It's not been defined by a Georgia court opinion. It's been defined in another context by the General Assembly, but the General Assembly can define that term in its statutes, and more importantly, can define the term lottery. The term lottery is permitted in the constitutional amendment that the voters approved in November of 1992. And the lottery has operated. The lottery now administers the bona fide coin-operated amusement that we have in the state that's contributing money to the Hope Scholarship and other educational programs. Those machines are, by definition, have to have an element of skill. And like most forms of gambling, sports betting, I think we can acknowledge, has elements of skill. Mr. Green stated in his testimony that that's the view of most people. It's our view that there's an element of chance. Of course, you can't know the outcome of a sporting contest, but until it happens. But there's also people that know what they're doing in sports betting do better than people that don't typically. So there's that element. So the lottery's my point is that the lottery is already administering Senator Mullis games that have an element of skill as well as an element of chance, and the General Assembly has the ability to define what the lottery can and can't do, and that's what your bill, Senator Mullis, does, and we believe appropriately and legally. The Ultra Telecom case that Mr. Green mentioned from 2010, Georgia Supreme Court, it had a vigorous dissent from Justice Melton, who said, "Hold on a second. If you open this up and say that games with such a low skill level as the games in that in that case had, then you've eviscerated the prohibition, the constitutional prohibition on casino gambling. But Justice Melton was in the minority. Justice Melton leaving the court, actually, and as he's announced this summer. But the court in 2010, acknowledged that the state could permit those games under the existing provisions of the Constitution. The reason, Mr. Chairman, that we don't have a lot of law on this is twofold. One, our Constitution's only prohibited casino gambling since the passage of the Lottery Amendment. Before that, you had criminal statutes that prohibited gambling, but the constitutional prohibition that Justice Melton wrote, interestingly, when he was a lawyer in the state law department, as part of passing the lottery, we said we're also going to prohibit casino gambling. So it's only been on the books since 1992. Similarly, Mr. Chairman, as you well know, the only reason we're even talking about sports betting is that it's only been 2.5 years since the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated those provisions of the Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act, PASPA, that said you can only do this in Nevada and a couple of other places. So it's only been that short window of time, 2 to 3 years, that we've had other states other than primarily a Nevada operating sports book. So you have a paucity of case law on it. But the case law that does exist, and I won't repeat all the things that Mr. Green said that I agree with, suggests that under the General Assembly's ability to define the term lottery, and under the constitutional authority of the lottery to operate games of skill and chance, as it's currently doing with bona fide coin-operated amusement, that it has the ability to do that. And again, Mr. Chairman, those are my comments.
Okay.
Take any questions that the members have.
That's great. One reason I wanted you here is because of our previous conversations and your obvious depth of knowledge on this subject and the legalities. So if I'm kind of defining our gambling framework in Georgia, obviously the lottery is legal. It's a constitutional provision. And because in that same constitutional provision it, let's say, outlaws or makes illegal, prohibits us from allowing, without changing the Constitution, both casino gambling, whatever that may mean, and pari-mutuel horse betting.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Then you could make a straight-faced argument that there is no prohibition on sports wagering as it is now. There was, through a federal law, the Wire Act, is that what we called it?
It was actually, it was called PASPA, Professional Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992, and it limited sports wagering to Nevada, and there were a couple other states.
Oregon, I think.
Oregon,
was the
I
other,
think. Primarily, Nevada obviously was the big one, and the court said, hold on a second, if one state can do it, all states can do it, and that was in 2018, and that's why states since that decision, Mr. Chairman, have been doing this.
But if a state doesn't otherwise prohibit sports betting, you theoretically could have it now because we had a federal law that, because the Supremacy Clause prohibited states from doing it, whatever their Constitution said.
Correct. So yeah, that's right, Mr.
So do you think we even need a bill?
There's certainly an argument to be made, Mr. Chairman.
FanDuel and DraftKings, they're having contests in this state now and don't have a bill to allow them.
There's a strong argument to be made, Mr. Chairman, that for precisely the reasons the chairman just articulated, that it's legal now. But nearly every gaming lawyer, Mr. Green certainly said this, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, is that if your state is going to acknowledge the legality of gaming, you need a robust regulatory regime, or you suffer all of the negative consequences of unregulated, unchecked.
And as you say, the cleaner or the safest legal course of action, if you were going to be invested in multiple millions of dollars in this, would be to let's have a constitutional provision that says no question it's constitutional, and then have a statutory framework.
The way I would say it, if I may, Mr. Chairman, is that if you amended the Constitution, one, it would push it out, because again, the earliest we could achieve that would be 2023, and even that assumes that you pass the enabling legislation before the constitutional amendment passed on the ballot. But yes, that to eliminate these discussions about the definition of casino gambling and what the lottery is and isn't permitted to do under the Constitution and statutes.
The uncertainties around.
You would reduce uncertainty, legal uncertainty, Mr. Chairman, and I concede that readily, because I don't want to, I want to be very, very candid that that's true. But I also am firmly of the view, and have been for some time, that Chairman Mullis and the folks he's working with are correct that if it is litigated, I believe, Mr. Chairman, that the Georgia Supreme Court would hold Chairman Mullis's bill to be constitutional. That is my legal opinion that I'm here to
The other
offer.
advantage of a constitutional amendment is you allow the citizens of Georgia to weigh in and give us that clarity. Are they okay with it or not?
Absolutely, that is a political benefit in addition to the legal effect that we described, Mr. Chairman.
As far as the timing, then, that seems to be the bigger issue. Do the Atlanta Hawks have TV contracts coming up before 2023 that this might impact, or is it, when's your cycle for the NBA?
The Hawks' support of this, Mr. Chairman, and of course the president of the team, Mr. Coonan, came and testified before your committee right before we all went home last March, Mr. Chairman. It's not specific to that for the Hawks. I was just pointing out that the delay. The Hawks' interest is in having fan engagement, just as Mr. Coonan testified this time last year. The Hawks wants their fans engaged, and if their fans are going to bet on a Hawks game, they want it doing it in a legal, cleanly regulated, in from the cold environment.
And doesn't that in-game betting increase fan engagement?
Absolutely.
Right, so they care what happens down to the last yard gained or point scored or whatever, right?
Again, Mr. Chairman, the Hawks' support of Chairman Mullis's bill is more general than that. I mean,
it was,
they're just saying, hey,
that is a factor though, right? And so if a fan stays engaged till the last bucket in a basketball game, then their viewership percentage or ratings will be higher, and the TV revenues will be higher based on those revenues. I mean, that is a underlying factor here, or at least a side
I would
effect.
stick with for what I'm here to talk about. I would let an expert on the revenues and all of that, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to get out of my tree,
okay. I won't push it.
But they support it.
Okay. Other questions? Let me ask you, Senator Mullis, while I got you, because I'm hitting that hard deadline. Would you object to us proceeding with the constitutional amendment or considering that as well until we decide? I'm looking at the calendar.
Yes.
We want to present these next week, and if we don't have one dropped or pending in time to be assigned to the committee, if the determination goes the other way, that one's necessary and we don't have one, then you've killed your bill for a year anyway.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, I do have a constitutional amendment ready.
Okay.
But I have heard from the the Attorney General's office, and they're not sure if you need one. I've had legislative counsel, some say don't need one, some say just like that, it'd make it cleaner. So the debate is all around us. However, I have one available and ready if need be. But then again, remember, this is a 2-year process. It wouldn't be on the ballot for 2022. And maybe we do the constitutional amendment next year. I don't know, but there's something to discuss. And
Seems like it would leave your options open if you went ahead, and I'm happy to co-sign that with you. And I'm not declaring that you may certainly persuade us that we don't need one, Mr. Highsmith. And some of these others, there is clearly a legal dispute. Would you agree, Robert, that the reason this bill is going through the lottery is because by calling this a lottery game, you would not need another constitutional amendment since those are already permitted?
Well, I would first of all defer to Senator Mullis on the whys of why his bill has the regulatory regime under the lottery. One thing is you've already got a regulatory regime that's not only regulating lottery games, but it's also regulating and administering bona fide coin-operated amusement, and has been for several years. I think it was 2012, Mr. Chairman, that came in under the lottery. And it's certainly true that the General Assembly in its power to define the term lottery, can define it to include the activities permitted under Senator Mullis's bill, and that is an enhancement to the legal argument that one might have to make if there's a challenge to the regime.
Do you agree if we do it under this regime, under the lottery, that the proceeds must go to Hope Scholarship and pre-K programs, education?
Would have to flow the same way that other lottery programs
Would
do,
not
Mr.
have
Chairman.
the option for us to spend it on rural health care, broadband expansion, or any of those other subject matters?
That is my understanding, Mr. Chairman. I came here with my constitutional arguments in my head, and I don't want to be too definitive on something that I wasn't prepared to talk about, but that is my understanding, Mr. Chairman.
Are you lit up for another question? Are you good? All right. Senator Lucas, I'm going to recognize you for our last question, and then we're going to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I got a statement. We sit around and we talk about it and we debate about it. You cannot legislate morality. Right after the Civil War, Georgia was gambling. The widows of the soldiers were gambling to raise money to take care of the kids. It's in the history book. I mean, we talk about it back and forth. When you talk about Mullis bill, you talk about the lottery. The lottery can legally operate gambling. We passed the Constitutional Amendment, but that money has to go directly for education. That money has to go directly for education. Can't be spent on anything else. Beach had the last bill wagering on it. I tied rural health in it to try to come up with some money to pay for the outlying health costs of all these counties, like Hancock County. Those counties don't have money, but you know, it's debatable. We have folks coming in talking about it, but I've never seen a preacher turn down a donation in the church that came from gambling. You know, and I hate to say it, but you know, the ministers have, by the tax code, which I found out when I was dealing with a minister, dealing with a bank, that they can come up with love offerings. I mean, and guess what? It ain't tax. You know, so we debating the thing that has been in Georgia all these years. When I was a little boy, I used to go play the numbers for my grandmama. She paid 2 and 3 cents. I take it to the bug man's house. Hey, guess what? You know, the only thing about the bug man, there was no guarantee the bug man was gonna pay you when you hit the number. You're right. All right. Well, with that, my love offering to this committee is going to be we are adjourned until Tuesday at 3:30. Y'all have a great weekend.